Welcome to another VueJS 2 video. In this video, I want to dive into something very important, components. Components are a key concept you can use in VueJS, which allow you to build your application or widget or whatever you're building from a couple or from a pool of reusable pieces of components. You can build these components on your own, and each component holds a template and the business logic belonging to the template and to that component therefore. In this video, I want to dive into the very basics, but on this channel, I will have more videos on components where we will learn how to use them in bigger projects and which advanced features they have, how we can let them communicate, and so on. Now let's start with the basics first though. I'm in JS Fiddle here again with a very basic setup where I have my app controlled by my Vue instance down there. And now let's make this app a little bit more interesting. Let's add a horizontal line and there add another div. And in this div, let's say I want to have a paragraph where I say username : max, something like that. Now, not that interesting, I guess, but it's a bit more content. Now let's also add a new field here, which is the username field in the data object, which is max, which allows me to output that username dynamically here at least. So a bit better at least. We see the same, but now with dynamic data. Now imagine that this would be some kind of user section which we want to repeat over and over again. So to actually see this, I'm going to not style this, I'm going to give this a class of user and set up this class in the top right corner where I can configure my CSS styles. Here we can give this user class some very simple styling. Let's say a border of 1 pixel, solid and light gray. Maybe a background color of white and maybe some light padding of 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Better. So that is our user object. And now we not only have one user, but multiple users. So let's remove username and instead have users. And now with users, we have an array clearly. And in this array, we want to have some objects where each user simply has a username, like Max. And then let's add 2 other ones. So here, let's say we also have Chris. And we have a last one with a username of Anna maybe. Now I want to output that, of course, and the obvious solution here is to use v-for to create a loop and to loop through the array and replicate this div and the content as often as we need to. So loop through this and then simply say v-for user in users, and here I can simply then output username referring to the user in each iteration. Now that gives me my 3 parts here. And there's one thing we can already see. This part here is like a contained piece in our application. It has its own template, we could say, this div, and its own logic, or at least its own data here. So if that were a more complex object, even with some calculations around, let's say a button to edit the user or something like that, then this would quickly grow, and therefore in our only Vue instance, we would quickly populate a lot of methods and data fields with data and methods only related to this part of our template, this div here. So it would make sense to outsource this into its own piece of code. And of course we can do this with VueJS. We can create a new component for that. We do this by accessing the global Vue object and then accessing component like this. This will create a global component, which means we can use it at any Vue instance application-wide. So here, we first give this a selector, which means our custom HTML tag, you could say. And you would typically prefix this with a unique, prefix to make sure you're not accidentally overwriting some existing HTML element or something like that. So we could prefix it with app and then give it the name of user maybe. So this name in the quotation marks is totally up to you. And then in here, we pass an object. And now that's important. Vue component basically just extends your Vue instance. So this means this object has the same fields as your Vue instance with one major difference. The data property here is no longer an object, it's now a function. It is a function which now returns an object, and this object again will hold your data. So we have this extra step of having a function here. And we need this because due to the fact of it extending our Vue instance and maybe having multiple components, or at least using this component here multiple times, they would all share the same object. And therefore, we need to make sure that this is an instance where we make sure that the object which holds our data, which should belong to a single component, is not shared across all components which use this selector here. So therefore here we could then simply copy our users, the user property here, and insert it here in the object, having the users in this file now, or not in this file, in this component here, I should say. So let me tidy this up. So here are the users in this newly created component, which again is like a Vue instance with this extra data thing here to make sure we're not sharing data across same components. And what this allows me to do now is to also get rid of that, I would say. But for that, for me to be able to get rid of that, I also need to set up a template. So let's add a template here by adding the template property that would have also been available for the other Vue instance here, but there we didn't need it because we automatically fetch our template here with the L property, fetch the element from the DOM and use that as an element, but we could have overwritten it with the template. Well, here for the component, we definitely do have to override it because we don't have any other template. We're not fetching anything and we can't. So here, I simply will place my template, which is a string. And now, of course, I want to grab that HTML code and put it in the string. And we have to make sure to put it into one line here because a string doesn't supply or support multi-line code. You could use, if you were using an environment where you can work with ES6 code, you could use template literals with the backticks to support multi-line strings. But here I will simply stick to the single quote to, well, create an inline string. And we will, in one of the other videos, in the upcoming videos here, maybe at the point of time you're watching this, we will have a look at how we can find a better solution, because clearly this is not an optimal template if you got more code than what we do have here. Well, anyways, with that in place, what I can do is I can simply replace this code in my template of the Vue instance with app user, the selector I set up here. And if I now hit Control Enter, we see nothing. The reason for this is, if we open the error log, that there seems to be some problem with v4. And there is one restriction you have to be aware of. In this template here, in the template of any component, you must only have one root element. Now you could say we clearly do have one element, we have one div, but we're looping through it with v4, so in the end we will have more than one div. So we simply have to wrap this in another outer div so that we only have one root element. That's an important restriction. If we now hit Control Enter, we see the free user sections, and now we got a working application using our own component where we outsource this user-related code. Now, with that in place, the great thing about components is we can simply reuse them. So add another app user, hit Control Enter again, and on we go. That's the great thing about components, we can reuse them. Now, of course, the major restriction here is this ugly inline string template. If we have anything more than the very simple code we're using here, well, this will quickly be no fun to work with it. That's the reason why the next video, maybe already out at the point of time you're watching this, will cover a much better way of working with Vue components and their templates. It will also leave JS fiddle and start setting up a real development environment and workflow. Nonetheless, what we saw here is how easy it is to set up components, how easy it is to work with components, and what their major advantage is. Containing your code in a single reusable piece or part you can then use wherever you need it and don't have to crowd your main Vue instance with all that logic. One important annotation here, you can also set up components locally by adding the components property to the Vue instance and then having the selector as the property name, like app user, and then as a value here, the object which you pass here as an argument to your Vue component method. So that's the alternative. If you know that you want to use that component only locally in that Vue instance here, well, then you would, or you could set it up locally Otherwise, do it globally like here to make sure you can use it in any instance or in any component you have in your application. See you in the other videos. Bye.